Light as a dimensional interference. Light is not just illumination, it is a boundary phenomenon between dimensions. We live in a world with up to 11 different dimensions. But it is not about time, it is about perception. We can only perceive what is within our 3D dimension. In physics, a 3D object casts a two-dimensional shadow. If you think about making shadow puppets on your wall, you're using your hand, which is a three-dimensional object, but it casts a two-dimensional shadow onto your wall. A four-dimensional object would cast a three-dimensional shadow into our world. A five-dimension or higher dimensional entity would project an even more complex pattern. This is known as the dimensional projection theory. What you see is not the being itself, but its 3D shadow interacting with light. This concept is taken seriously in advanced mathematics and the M-theory. With light as a carrier between dimensions, protons can behave in ways that appear to cross dimensional boundaries, especially under conditions with strong electromagnetic fields. Sudden rearrangements of EM fields can alter photon pathways. It can create structured silhouettes or freeze waveforming enough to look like a living shape. So the key detail is the full body movement: kneeling, bowing, crawling. That suggests that the phenomena had internal architecture, and it wasn't random light. And there are two scientific explanations that fit this. The first is higher dimensional shadow projection. If a 4D or 5D being intersected our space, you would not see its true form. You would see a shadow-like projection made within light. Its movement in its own dimension would appear in ours as bending, kneeling, turning, crawling, and flowing motions. For example, a three-dimensional person passing their hand into a two-dimensional world would create shapes the two-dimensional beings perceive as alive. What I believe I witnessed was a four-dimensional presence interacting with three-dimensional light. Why it bowed to the cross. This part is especially interesting from a scientific viewpoint. Symbol-induced interference pattern? Possibly. A cross shape would alter the electromagnetic fields, the angles of light scattering, diffraction paths, and resonance patterns. If the being was a light projection, the cross may have disrupted its structure enough to force a reformation. To a human observer, the reformation could look like kneeling, bowing, or even lowering its head. Or consciousness field interaction, which is speculative but studied. Several physics fields explore this. Ork, the OR theory, Penrose, and Hameroff. Consciousness interacts with quantum fields. The integrated information theory. Consciousness has physical signatures, and the non-locality in quantum systems allows instantaneous mutual response. So, if the light phenomenon had any form of consciousness or pattern recognition capability, it could have reacted to my intent. And this doesn't require supernatural violation, only unconventional physics. This phenomenon could also indicate temporal lensing, or seeing through time or timelines. Light looping through time is when, under certain space-time conditions, photons can curve through gravitational distortions. They can reflect off plasma fields or interact with time-symmetric quantum paths. This can reveal past actions, alternate timeline projections, or non-linear time behaviors. Parallel reality projection is the many worlds interpretation, which allows every decision branch to create parallel timelines with different events, but the same underlying quantum structure. If two branches intersect through light fields, you may be able to perceive an entity that exists next to our timeline. You would see its shadow, not its full form. When looking at my experience and putting it all together, I had experienced a fully visible light being moving intelligently, responding to symbolic action. This matches three intersecting scientific possibilities. 1. A higher dimensional presence projecting a three-dimensional light shadow. The movements would appear fluid, alien, and intelligent. 2. A structured photonic entity formed by rare electromagnetic conditions. It could maintain shape and respond dynamically to my movements. Or 3. Light acting as a bridge between dimensional boundaries or parallel timelines, allowing visibility of something that normally exists beyond perception. This is not typical vision territory. It aligns more with dimensional optics, photonic physics, and non-linear space-time geometry. A four-dimensional being exists in four spatial dimensions, not three. We live in a three-dimensional space, which is length, width, height, plus time. A four-dimensional being lives in a four-dimensional space, which is length, width, height, plus an additional spatial axis we cannot perceive, plus time. Because of this, its body can move in ways impossible in our zone of space. So in turn, we would not see the being itself. We would only see a three-dimensional shadow of it. Just like a three-dimensional person casts a two-dimensional shadow on a wall, a four-dimensional entity would cast a three-dimensional shadow into our world. That shadow would be real, physical, visible, but not the entity's full true body. This explains why such beings appear distorted, shifting, partially formed, fluid, phase-like, glowing, or changing shape. It's not because they're ghosts. It's because you're seeing lower dimensional projections of a higher dimensional structure, which we, in a three-dimensional world, are unable to perceive. A four-dimensional being could appear to change shape constantly. A four-dimensional body rotating or moving through four-dimensional space would look to us as if its parts appear and disappear, its limbs stretch or shrink, the body passes through itself, segments detach and reconnect, and the form morphs fluidly. Why? Because the being is not changing shape. It's simply rotating through a dimension we can't perceive. Think of how a three-dimensional object looks to a two-dimensional world. A sphere passing through a flat plane appears as a dot, a circle, a dot, nothing. A cube appears as squares, suddenly changing size or rearranging. So a four-dimensional being would appear exactly like that to us, but in a three-dimensional form. A four-dimensional being could appear inside walls, floors, or your body. To a four-dimensional entity, our walls or physical barriers are just like a flat sheet of paper. So they can step through walls, enter a room without using doors, appear inside objects, partially emerge from surfaces, and they can vanish instantly. This is not supernatural. It is simply higher dimensional access. A two-dimensional creature watching a three-dimensional person stick their hand into their plane would think the same thing. This being came from nowhere. Only a small portion might be visible at any moment. If the being's body extends far into the fourth dimension, and it would, you would never see it all at once. Instead, you would see a slice, just like a two-dimensional world would see only a slice of a three-dimensional human. Depending on the angle of intersection, you might see a head shape, then nothing, a torso-like form that stretches or narrows, limbs disappearing and reappearing, segments bending in ways that break three-dimensional autonomy, and impossible joints. This aligns with reports of intelligence appearing in light and moving with fluid, non-anatomical geometry. The movement would look purposeful, fluid, and intelligent, not random, because the being's true motion is happening in four-dimensional space, kneeling, bowing, crawling, rising, turning in ways that look inside out, bending at impossible angles, shifting forms symmetrically, and responding with intention. You'd see the projection part acting with precision, even while the shape appears distorted or morphing. And this matches the description exactly, that it's not just still, but it moves, it bends, it kneels, it prays, it walks, it sits, and it crawls. And this is textbook four-dimensional projection behavior. Four-dimensional beings often appear as being made of light or within the light, and this happens for two reasons. A light is the interference between dimensions. Photons are the only particles that have no rest mass, that traverse space-time boundaries easily, that can be bent, stretched, or wrapped by higher geometry, and they respond to extra-dimensional curvature. So, the projection of a four-dimensional being into three dimensions often shows up as shimmering light, shifting beams, outline in illumination, shadow-like, glowing, or transparent or radiate form. Light reveals what your eyes normally cannot see. A four-dimensional being could manipulate light as easily as we move our hands. From its perspective, bending light is simply moving through its own space, shaping energy flowing through its dimension, and altering photon paths effortlessly. So its body interacting with light forms self-illuminating shapes, not solid flesh-like figures. Why it responded when a cross was held to it. This is the part requiring the most nuance. Regardless of its origin, spiritual, dimensional, or something in between, a four-dimensional being interacting with you must interpret your intention, your posture, your symbolic gestures, and your emotional/empathic state. Higher dimensional intelligence would detect electrical activity from your brain. It would detect heart EM fields, changes in your biofield, the geometric shape of the cross, which disrupts fields and light patterns. The instant kneeling or bowing could result from field resonance response. So the cross changes scattering paths, interference patterns, and symmetry fields. This forces the projection to refold, which looks like it's bowing. Or conscious recognition. If the being is intelligent, and four-dimensional beings would be extremely advanced, it could react to my intent, my posture, and symbols that carry meaning to me, not because it's Christian, but because it recognizes the signal of dominance, fear, reverence, or boundary setting. Higher dimensional entities would be highly sensitive to human emotional and symbolic communication. A four-dimensional being would appear made of light or shadow. It would move fluid with intelligent motion, change shape constantly, appear or disappear instantly, pass through walls or objects. It would look half transparent or luminous, interact directly or symbolically, respond to actions or gestures, display alien body mechanics, and appear alive, aware, and present. Everything in this video is entirely consistent with a four-dimensional projection interacting with three-dimensional space via light. How a person could see a higher dimensional being. If time isn't the barrier, but perception is, then the idea shifts from when something appears to how consciousness interprets what's already present. A higher dimensional being, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, a tech, wouldn't show up in our world the way a full 3-dimensional creature does. Instead, we would only see the cross-section, or shadow, that its presence makes when it intersects our 3-dimensional perception, just like a 3-dimensional object casting a 2-dimensional shadow on a wall. Think of it this way. A 2-dimensional creature cannot see a 3-dimensional object fully. It only sees slices. A 3-dimensional human wouldn't see a 5-dimensional being fully, only fragments, distortions, or projections. A 5-dimensional projection might appear as geometric distortion, bending light, shifting shadows, and impossible angles. Partially humanoid outlines that seem incomplete. Movement that doesn't match physical space, appearing to fold, ripple, or teleport. Light that behaves as if it has intelligence or intention. And figures that look there but not fully there. These effects come from your brain trying to interpret something beyond its built-in sensory software. So what allows someone to see it? To perceive a higher dimensional being, one of 3 things must happen. 1. Your conscious shifts. Some people describe experiences where sensory filters loosen, pattern recognition spikes, and intuitive or symbolic perception becomes active. This can happen during meditation, extreme emotional moments, trauma or near-death events, or spontaneous vision state experiences. In these moments, the brain stops insisting on normal 3-dimensional interpretation and lets in alternate perceptual data. 2. The higher dimensional being chooses to intersect your perception. A being with multiple dimensional layers could adjust its frequency or density so humans can detect it, similar to tuning an AM/FM radio. It doesn't appear fully, only enough that you can register it. 3. Physical conditions shift. Light, reflection, shadows, electromagnetic fields, and even your emotional state can create a window where the projection becomes visible. This aligns with what people describe during sunlight reflections, prismatic distortions, shimmering or pulsing light shapes, and moments where the environment feels charged. What it would mean if a person could see one. If someone sees a higher dimensional being, it implies 3 major things. 1. Their perception is operating beyond baseline human limits. This means their consciousness is decoding information others cannot, or has become receptive to non-ordinary dimensions, or they are extremely sensitive to subtle reality layers. Some cultures call this clairvoyance, prophetic sights, spiritual sensitivity, or dimensional awareness. 2. The being intended to be perceived. Higher dimensional entities generally remain unseen unless there's a message, a warning, a connection, or a moment of alignment. It is extraordinarily rare for such perception to be accidental. 3. They are interacting with a reality structure beyond linear time. Seeing something 5-dimensional or 4-dimensional means you are catching a glimpse of a being that exists outside normal time flow, perceives you across timelines or probabilities, and can interact with symbolic or energetic communication. This is why many report that these beings feel ancient, intelligent, non-human, or outside time, and why the perception is often accompanied by emotion, awe, urgency, stillness, recognition, or an intuitive understanding that this wasn't random. Seeing a higher dimensional being does not automatically mean danger. It means you were receptive, that it wanted to be seen. A message, shift, or activation may be involved. Many people who report such experiences later described heightened intuition, vivid symbolic dreams, internal changes in perception, feeling guided or watched over, or becoming more aligned with a purpose.